Before he said those words, the room was loud. People were laughing, glasses clinking, conversations overlapping. It looked like one of those moments families later describe as a good memory. Then my father cleared his throat. And suddenly, everything stopped. He looked straight at me and said, "We don't count on you. Not in private, not gently, in front of everyone." What shocked me most wasn't what he said. It was what happened next. No gasps, no objections. No one stepped in to correct him. That was the moment I realized something terrifying. The sentence hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been rehearsed silently for years, and I was the last one to hear it out loud. If you've ever sat in a room full of family and felt completely alone, if you've ever been erased without being kicked out, then stay with me. Because what happened after that sentence didn't just change how I saw my father, it changed how I saw myself. And the ending of this story is not what they... Families don't always hurt us with violence or abandonment. Sometimes they hurt us with sentences, short, precise, and delivered without emotion. Words that are spoken once, but echo for years. On this channel, we tell the stories that rarely get told out loud. The moments that happen at dinner tables, birthday parties, and family gatherings. Moments where someone is quietly diminished while everyone else pretends not to notice. This story is about public rejection. About being told you don't matter, not by a stranger, but by a parent. And about the deep confusion that follows when love and humiliation come from the same place. But this is not just a story about pain. It's a story about awakening. About the moment you realize that belonging should never require self-erasure. If you've ever questioned your worth because of your family, if you've ever carried shame that was never yours, you are not alone here. Let me tell you what really happened. The house was full that afternoon. Too full. Voices overlapped, chairs scraped against the floor. Someone laughed too loud near the kitchen. It was one of those family gatherings that looked good in photos, crowded, lively, convincing. I stood near the dining table, holding a glass I hadn't touched in minutes, watching everyone move around me like I was part of the furniture. Not ignored exactly, just unnecessary. My father was at the center of it all, as usual, commanding the room without raising his voice. People leaned in when he spoke. They always had. He cleared his throat, not loudly, just enough, and instinctively, the conversation softened. "I've been thinking," he said, glancing around the table, "about how things will be handled moving forward." I felt my shoulders tense. Whenever he said things like that, it meant decisions had already been made. Announcements, not discussions. He named a few people, tasks, responsibilities, plans. Each name landed where it always did, on the same shoulders, in the same hierarchy. Then his eyes moved to me. He didn't hesitate. "We don't count on you," my father said. The sentence didn't echo. It dropped, like something heavy falling onto a quiet floor. For half a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My mind tried to correct it, soften it, rephrase it into something less final. But then he continued, calmly, as if clarifying logistics. "You're not reliable. So, we've decided it's better not to include you." And just like that, the air changed. No one spoke, no one protested, no one even looked surprised. That silence, that collective agreement disguised as neutrality, hurt more than the words themselves. I felt heat rush to my face, then drain completely. My hands went cold around the glass. Somewhere in my chest, something folded inward. I searched the room for eye contact. Any sign that someone would step in, correct him, say, "That's not fair." My mother stared at the table. My siblings avoided my eyes. An aunt shifted uncomfortably, then reached for her drink. The message was clear. This wasn't new to them. It was just new to me. My father moved on immediately, redirecting the conversation as if he hadn't just erased me in front of everyone. Laughter slowly returned, cautious at first, then louder leaved laughter. The kind people use when tension passes, and they're grateful it wasn't aimed at them. I stood there, still, trying to understand how a single sentence could undo years of trying. Because I had tried. I had shown up. helped when asked, stayed quiet when blamed, smiled when overlooked, and yet, somehow, I was still the one they didn't count on. A familiar voice in my head whispered, "Maybe he's right." That voice had been trained over years, fed by comparisons, dismissals, and subtle reminders that I was always slightly out of place. Not bad enough to exclude completely, but never good enough to trust. I excused myself quietly and walked toward the hallway, my legs moving on instinct. I locked myself in the bathroom and leaned against the door, breathing shallowly. I stared at my reflection. I looked normal, intact, like someone who hadn't just been publicly disqualified from their own family. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't disappointment. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I finally understood that this wasn't about one comment or one moment. This sentence had been forming for years, shaped by every time my efforts went unnoticed and my mistakes were magnified. The truth was brutal in its simplicity. I had been trying to earn a place that was never offered freely. A knock sounded on the door. "Are you okay?" someone asked, half-hearted. I swallowed. "I'm fine." It was the automatic answer, the safest one. When I stepped back into the room, no one mentioned what had happened. Not my father, not anyone else. The gathering continued, smoother now that the disruption, me, had been emotionally handled. I took my seat at the edge of the table, invisible again. But something inside me refused to fully disappear this time, because once words like that are spoken out loud, they do more than hurt. They expose. And as I sat there, nodding politely, pretending nothing had changed, a thought surfaced that both terrified and steadied me. If they don't count on me, why am I still counting on them? That was the beginning, not of rebellion, not of confrontation, but of a slow, irreversible awakening. After that day, the sentence didn't fade. It followed me. Not loudly, not aggressively, but persistently. Like a quiet echo that surfaced in moments when I was alone, when the house was silent, when there was nothing left to distract me from the truth. "We don't count on you." At first, I tried to disprove it. That had always been my instinct. I replayed the years in my head, searching for evidence, moments I could point to and say, "See? I mattered. I showed up. I was useful." And there were many. I was the one who rearranged my schedule when someone needed help. The one who stayed late, drove across town, canceled plans. I filled gaps without being asked and absorbed blame without defending myself. I learned early that being easy was safer than being honest. When my siblings forgot birthdays, I remembered. When conflicts erupted, I mediated. When tension filled the room, I softened myself to ease it. I became reliable in silence. But reliability, I learned, doesn't always earn respect. Sometimes it just earns expectation. The memories came in fragments. I remembered the first time I noticed the pattern years ago, when my brother missed an important commitment. My father had laughed it off, called him busy, defended him before anyone else could question it. When I missed something once, just once, my father's disappointment had been sharp and public. "You always disappoint," he'd said back then. I remembered how often my efforts were treated as baseline, never exceptional. How praise came easily to others while I received instructions instead. Do better, try harder, be more like them. Each comment was small on its own, easy to excuse, easy to minimize. Together they formed a story where I was always the weak link. After the gathering, I noticed how carefully I replayed my interactions with my father. Every conversation felt like a test I didn't know the rules to. I monitored my tone, my posture, my words. I became hyper-aware of how I occupied space, trying not to take too much, trying not to be noticed for the wrong reasons. Still, nothing changed. I wasn't included in decisions. I was informed after they were made. I wasn't asked for opinions. I was assigned tasks. And when things went wrong, when plans failed, or stress rose, eyes shifted subtly toward me, not accusatory, just expectant, as if I were the easiest explanation. The most painful realization wasn't that my father didn't count on me. It was that he never had. Not really. I had mistaken tolerance for acceptance, proximity for belonging. One evening, weeks after the gathering, I found myself scrolling through old photos. Holidays, birthdays, smiles frozen in time. From the outside, we looked like a family stitched together by tradition and history. But when I studied the images more closely, I saw it. I was always slightly off-center, leaning in, trying to fit, trying. There was one photo that stopped me cold. A group picture taken years ago. Everyone's faces relaxed, natural, mine tense. Like I was bracing for something I couldn't name. That was when it hit me. I hadn't been living as myself. I had been performing for approval that was never guaranteed. And performance is exhausting when the audience has already decided how the story ends. I thought about confronting my father, imagined explaining myself, listing everything I'd done, every sacrifice, every compromise. But then I asked myself a question that changed everything. Would proof matter to someone who had already decided my worth? The answer scared me with its clarity. No, because this wasn't about evidence. It was about roles, and mine had been assigned long ago. That night, I sat alone, the room dim, and allowed myself to feel something I had avoided for years. Not anger, not sadness, but grief. Grief for the version of myself who believed that love could be earned through effort alone. Grief for the child who learned early that approval was conditional. Grief for the adult who kept hoping that one day someone would finally say, "We see you, we count on you." The sentence my father spoke hadn't created the wound, it had named it. And once something is named, it can no longer hide in confusion. I realized then that my entire life had been shaped around a single question: what do I need to do to be enough? But a new question was slowly forming beneath it, quiet, unsettling, powerful. What if I already am? That question didn't bring comfort right away. It brought disruption. Because if I was already enough, then the problem wasn't me. And if the problem wasn't me, then everything I had built my identity on was about to change. Once the question formed, what if I already am enough? I couldn't silence it. It followed me through ordinary moments, tugging at old memories and forcing them into new light. I began to notice patterns I had spent years excusing. It wasn't just my father, it was the system around him. Every family has one, even if no one names it. An unspoken structure where roles are assigned early and rarely questioned. The achiever, the favorite, the peacemaker, the disappointment, the problem. The invisible one, and suddenly I could see mine with painful clarity. My father sat at the center, the authority no one challenged. His approval was currency. Those closest to it thrived. Those outside it learned to survive quietly. My siblings had learned the rules instinctively: what earned praise, what invited criticism, when to speak, when to disappear. I had learned them too. Just from the wrong position. Looking back, I realized how often conflict ended with me absorbing it. When tension rose, eyes drifted toward me not because I caused it, but because I could carry it. I was the buffer, the shock absorber, the one who smoothed things over so others didn't have to. I remembered a moment from years ago, a heated argument between my father and my brother. Voices raised, tempers flaring. I had stepped in, calming things down, apologizing on my brother's behalf, even though I had nothing to do with it. So afterward, my father had clapped my shoulder. Good. At least someone here knows how to keep the peace. I had mistaken that for praise. What it really was assignment. Once I saw that, the past rearranged itself. Every "you're too sensitive," every "don't take it personally," every "just let it go" landed differently. Those phrases weren't advice. They were tools used to keep the system intact. I wasn't expected to be counted on. I was expected to absorb. The realization didn't come all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a map revealing itself line by line. Conversations I replayed suddenly made sense. Why my needs were minimized. Why my successes were met with silence. Why my mistakes were remembered longer. I wasn't failing the family. I was serving it, and the cost had been my sense of self. A few days later, I met an old friend for coffee, someone who had known me long before I learned how to shrink. We talked about small things at first: work, life, distance. Then she looked at me and asked a simple question. "Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was intrusive, but because it was sincere. I hesitated, then answered honestly, "I don't think I've ever been." She listened as I spoke, really listened. No interruptions, no excuses made on anyone's behalf. When I finished, she said something that stayed with me. People don't keep one person small by accident. It serves something. Her words echoed what I had already begun to understand. Families like mine don't collapse when someone is diminished. They stabilize. Everyone else gets to keep their place, untouched, unquestioned. And the one who carries the weight learns to confuse endurance with love. That night, alone again, I wrote everything down, every role, every memory, every moment that now felt different in retrospect. I wasn't doing it to build a case. I was doing it to tell myself the truth. And the truth was uncomfortable. If I stayed the same, nothing would change. The system didn't need me whole. It needed me compliant. For the first time, I felt something close to anger, not explosive, not reckless, but steady, focused, protective. Not toward them, toward myself. I realized then that healing wouldn't come from explaining, defending, or proving anything. It would come from stepping out of a role that had cost me my voice. But stepping out meant disruption. It meant disappointment. It meant resistance. It meant being seen as the problem all over again. And yet, for the first time, that no longer felt unbearable. Because now I understood something crucial. The moment you stop carrying what was never yours, the system panics. And I was no longer afraid of that panic. I was preparing for it. I didn't plan the confrontation. That's what people never understand. Moments like these aren't scheduled. They arrive when the silence becomes heavier than the fear. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, a family gathering that wasn't supposed to mean anything. No holiday, no celebration, just one of those casual meetings everyone insists are harmless. The kind where old dynamics quietly take their places before anyone notices. I noticed. The room felt familiar in the worst way. The same seating arrangement, the same voices dominating the space, the same jokes that weren't really jokes. And instinctively, my body prepared to do what it always had: stay alert, stay agreeable, stay small. But something had shifted. My father was speaking, holding court as usual, recounting a story that painted him as decisive, capable, indispensable. Heads nodded. Laughter followed. Approval circulated freely. Then he looked at me, not with anger, not even with disdain, with expectation. "So," he said, "are you finally going to do something useful with that situation of yours?" The room went quiet. Not shocked quiet. Anticipatory quiet. Everyone was waiting for my response, not because they cared what I would say, but because they were counting on what I always said. A deflection, a joke, an apology for existing. I felt it then, the familiar pull to smooth things over, to protect everyone from discomfort, to absorb the moment so the gathering could continue uninterrupted. But for the first time, I didn't move. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady when I spoke. No, the word landed awkwardly, like something dropped on a tiled floor. My father raised his eyebrows. "No, no," I repeated. "I'm not going to take that." A murmur passed through the room. Someone shifted in their chair. Someone else laughed nervously, as if this were a misunderstanding that could still be corrected. My father's expression hardened, not furious, just displeased. That familiar look that had silenced me for years. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Don't start something." I took a breath. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to retreat, to apologize. Instead, I continued. You said we don't count on you, I said, my voice calm but clear. You've said it before. And you said it in front of everyone. I'm done pretending that doesn't matter. The room froze. No one came to my defense. No one interrupted. No one told him to stop. That silence told me everything. My father scoffed. You're being dramatic. You always take things the wrong way. There it was. The script. I nodded slowly. That's what you say every time I point out how I'm treated. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Because it's true. You make yourself the victim. Something inside me steadied. This wasn't about winning. It was about truth. I didn't make myself anything, I said. I just stopped carrying what you put on me. That was when his voice sharpened. Watch your tone. I met his eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't look away. No, I said again. I've watched my tone my entire life. I've watched my words, my reactions, my needs, and it was never enough. The air felt thick, heavy, uncomfortable. Good. My mother cleared her throat. Maybe this isn't the time. It is, I said, gently but firmly. It's been overdue. No one moved. No one knew where to look. I continued, not raising my voice, not accusing, just stating facts. I've been told I'm too much and not enough in the same breath. I've been expected to help, to fix, to sacrifice, but never to need. And when I finally stopped doing that, I'm the problem. My father shook his head. You're rewriting history. I smiled, not out of humor, but clarity. No, I'm finally reading it. The reaction wasn't explosive. It was colder than that. Dismissal, deflection, discomfort disguised as superiority. He stood up. I'm not doing this. I know, I said. You never do. That was the moment, not the shouting, not the insults, the refusal. Because it confirmed what I had already learned. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about control. As he walked away, I felt something unexpected. Relief. I hadn't changed him. I hadn't fixed the family, but I had changed my position within it. And that was enough. The gathering continued awkwardly after that. Conversations resumed, forced and shallow. People avoided my eyes. Some looked annoyed. Others looked uncomfortable. No one asked if I was okay. And somehow, that no longer hurt, because I finally understood something. When you stop playing your role, the system doesn't thank you. It resists you. And that resistance is proof that you were never free. I left early that day, not storming out, not in tears, just quietly. For the first time, I wasn't carrying their weight with me, and I knew without a doubt that the real consequences were still coming. The aftermath didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, a delayed message, a conversation that never happened, an invitation that suddenly stopped coming. No one confronted me directly. No one apologized. Instead, the family adjusted, subtly, quietly, to a version of me they no longer recognized. I had stepped outside the role they assigned me, and the cost of that was distance. At first, it hurt more than I expected. I questioned myself constantly. Did I say too much? Did I exaggerate? Was it really that bad? Those doubts echoed late at night, fueled by years of conditioning that taught me to distrust my own perception. But something was different this time. The silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. Without the constant tension of trying to earn my place, I noticed how much energy I had been spending just to exist in that family. How every interaction came with an unspoken test. How love had always been conditional, offered only when I complied. And for the first time, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if the problem was never me? That question changed everything. I stopped reaching out first, stopped explaining myself, stopped chasing closure that was never going to be offered. And in that stillness, clarity emerged. My father never called to talk about what happened, not to understand, not to repair. The message was clear. Acknowledgement would mean accountability, and that was something he was unwilling to face. I grieved then, not the family I had, but the one I hoped for. The one I kept believing would appear if I just tried harder, stayed quieter, gave more. Letting go of that illusion was painful, but it was also freeing. Because I finally saw the truth. I had been loyal to people who were never loyal to my well-being. The turning point came quietly. One evening, as I watched my own reflection, I realized I no longer felt the urge to prove myself. I didn't need them to validate my experience. I didn't need permission to heal. I counted on myself now, and that changed how I walked, how I spoke, how I chose who had access to me. When family members eventually reached out again, it wasn't with curiosity or care. It was with expectations. With hints that things could go back to normal, I didn't argue. I simply didn't comply. Because normal had cost me my voice, and I was done paying that price. The truth is, reclaiming your power doesn't look dramatic. It looks quiet. It looks like boundaries. It looks like choosing peace over approval. It looks like walking away without slamming doors. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told you don't count, especially by the people who were supposed to protect you, hear this. Their inability to see your worth does not diminish it. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting to belong. It's deciding you already do, and choosing yourself anyway.